All right, welcome back to the deep dive. Today we're diving into something really crucial, especially for Indian tech start out there, and that's building some seriously strong enforceable patents. And we've got a ton of great sources to pull from today, so we'll definitely get into some actionable strategies for you.
Yeah, definitely. It's interesting how many startup patents they kind of end up being just for show, like paper tigers, right?
Yeah,
So today we really want to kind of dissect what it takes to build those patents that have, real teeth, real impact in the market.
absolutely. So let's jump right in. We're talking patents. Got to start somewhere. What's the first thing a startup should really focus on?
Well, it always begins with those initial sparks, those ideas, whether it's, the founder just having this moment of inspiration, or maybe it's the team kind of brainstorming and problem solving together. But the real key, the first critical step is documenting it all. Like everything needs to go down in a detailed invention disclosure document. This is what creates that official record of the invention. And then something our sources really hammer on is never ever share these disclosures outside the company without a non-disclosure agreement, an NDA. If you reveal your invention too early, before you have that protection, it can really, really hurt your chances of actually getting a patent.
Okay, so documentation, NDAs, those are like the non-negotiables right off the bat. Now, let's say you've got a bunch of these potential inventions all documented. How do you then decide which ones are actually worth pursuing?
Yeah, good question. That's where this whole strategic screening process comes in. See, not all ideas are actually patentable. Some of them might already exist out there. We call that prior art, or they might fall under what we call statutory restrictions. Like in India, for example, you can't really patent just pure software or a business method, not on its own anyway. It has to show some kind of real technical advancement. So to weed out those bad apples early on, what you really need is a focused patentability search. Think of prior art as any information that's already out there, publicly available. It could be patents, research papers, even software code that's publicly available, and it describes something similar to your invention. And for your search, a good starting point is, Google Patents or even the Indian Patent Office database. Use those keywords. Now, for those ideas that really do seem promising, the first move should be filing what's called a provisional application.
A provisional application. So what's the strategic advantage of going that route?
Well, with a provisional application, you're basically securing that early filing date for your invention, right? It gives you that patent pending status, and that lasts for a whole year. But the cool thing is, you don't need all those super detailed claims and specs that you'd need for a full application. So this 1 year window, it's super valuable, and it leads us right to the next important point, which is the power of showing, not telling,
Oh,
through prototypes and minimum viable products.
right, right, the MVP. So how does that whole MVP stage actually tie into making a patent stronger?
A working prototype or a minimum viable product, it adds so much weight to your application. Because now you're not just talking about an idea, you're showing that your invention, it actually works. It's got practical use, it's feasible. And that year after you file that provisional application, that's prime time to be developing this stuff. By actually building and testing your invention, you'll run into those real-world challenges, you can refine the design, and ultimately you're going to be able to draft much stronger, much more targeted claims in that complete application. You're not just describing, you're demonstrating.
So that year after the provisional filing, it's like a crucial period for development and refinement.
Yeah.
Now, for startups, they're always watching the budget, right? So what are some cost-saving measures they can take advantage of during this whole patent process?
Thankfully, there's some serious support from the Indian government here. Startups actually get a huge 80% reduction on those patent process fees. I mean, that's huge, right? It frees up your budget so you can file multiple applications covering all the different angles of your innovation, all for about the same cost as one standard application. So you're really multiplying your protection efforts early on. And then there's also the option for what's called an expedited examination, which can be super important in those, fast-moving tech sectors.
Yeah, that 80% reduction, that's significant. Are there other, maybe more specific programs that are really designed to help startups with these IP costs?
There is. There's this initiative called the Scheme for Facilitating Startups Intellectual Property Protection, or SIPP for short. Under SIPP, they have these registered patent agents who are basically like facilitators, and the government actually covers their service charges for filing patent applications. So the startup mostly just pays those official government fees. It really cuts down on that initial financial burden. And it's important to know SIPP doesn't just cover patents, it also covers design registrations and trademarks too. And they've even got WIPO technology and innovation support centers, or TICs, as facilitators. And from our sources, it sounds like there are even other schemes out there too. So it's definitely worth doing your research.
Wow, so it seems like the Indian government is, really putting in the effort to support these startup innovations through IP protection. Now, let's say a startup, they've secured their initial patents. How should they be thinking about expanding and strengthening their IP position from there?
That's where this whole idea of portfolio development comes into play. Instead of relying on just one or two patents, you want to build a whole portfolio. It's like a collection of patents, all specific product or process, each one covering a different innovative feature. It's a much more robust protection strategy. Think of it like this. It's much easier for a competitor to attack a single patent than to try and dismantle a whole network of protections.
Yeah, that makes total sense. Strength in numbers when it comes to IP.
Exactly. If you just have a handful of patents, an opponent in an infringement case, they can really focus all their energy on trying to invalidate just those few. But as your portfolio grows, let's say you've got 8, 10, or even more patents, the cost and the complexity for a competitor to try and challenge all of them, it becomes incredibly high. Often it's just too much to even attempt. Plus, with a bigger portfolio, the chances of a competitor accidentally infringing on one or more of your patents, it just goes up. It's a strong deterrent from the get-go.
So it's like building the strategic barrier of IP. Now, as a startup, they're growing, they're becoming a more established player. Does their patent strategy need to kind of evolve as well?
Oh, absolutely. As a startup matures, their patent strategy, it should really transition into what we call strategic portfolio management. Some sources even call it, it's an interesting analogy, the art of patent war, because at this stage, your patents, they're not just defensive tools. They're strategic assets. Like imagine them as pieces in a chess game. You're using them to influence the competition, to encourage collaboration.
Art of patent war, huh? That sounds like a pretty significant shift in thinking. So what are some of the key strategic moves involved there?
Well, our sources highlight three main strategies. The first is, they call it smoke screens. This is where you intentionally file a ton of patent applications all across different aspects of your technology, and even minor variations, potential workarounds, you name it. What you're doing is creating this patent thicket, they call it. It makes it really hard for competitors to even figure out which patents are your core ones, and it makes it way harder for them to try and design around your main innovations. So picture this. You've got a startup, and they've got this core AI algorithm. They might file patents on, specific applications of that algorithm in different industries, or even just slight tweaks to how the data is processed. On their own, these might not seem super important, but together they create this, dense, confusing landscape for any competitor trying to navigate it.
So it's about, like, creating this dense fog of IP to obscure your real advantages. What's the second strategy?
Second one is using patents as bartering chips. You see, in a lot of tech-heavy industries, you've got companies all operating in overlapping areas, right? So it's not uncommon for multiple companies to end up maybe unintentionally infringing on each other's patents. This is where a strong patent portfolio is really key. You can use it to negotiate cross-licensing agreements, so both parties can operate without having these constant legal battles. It's also super important when it comes to developing industry standards, where companies usually agree to license their essential patents under what we call FRAND terms, which stands for fair, reasonable, and non-discriminatory.
So that sounds like, turning potential conflict into a win-win. Okay, so you got smoke screens, bartering chips. What's the third move in this art of patent war?
The third strategy is called open disclosures. Sometimes a company might choose to actually publicly disclose some of their technologies, strategically, of course. Usually, it's stuff that's not their core, most important tech. By doing this, whether it's through publishing research papers, detailing the tech on, specialized websites, or even deliberately abandoning patent applications after they've been published, they're creating what we call prior art. And what that does is it prevents competitors from patenting those specific technologies later on, which could actually, it could hinder the company's own development down the line or even slow down progress in a particular field.
Wow. So it's this interesting balance, right? You're protecting your core innovations, but you're also kind of shaping the whole technological landscape around you.
Mhm.
Now, as a patent portfolio grows, I imagine managing all the costs associated with that, it's got to become a major consideration. So how can startups keep those costs under control in the long run?
Yeah, that's a great point. It leads to this important practice we call pruning to bloom. Just like, if you're a gardener, you trim away the dead branches to help the healthy ones grow. You got to regularly review your patent portfolio and be willing to abandon those patents that are covering technologies that are, outdated or maybe products that you don't even make anymore. This way, you avoid paying those ongoing maintenance fees for patents that aren't bringing you any value.
So it's about being strategic about what you keep,
Yeah.
not just clinging to every single patent forever.
Exactly. But, before you abandon any patent, you really need to carefully evaluate its strategic value. For example, even if you're not using a particular technology anymore, if you know a competitor is using it, that patent could still be valuable. It could be a bartering chip or just a deterrent. It's a decision that really has to be based on both cost and strategy.
Well, this has been a really, really comprehensive look at patent strategy, especially for Indian tech startups. And it's clear that it's not, a one and done kind of thing. It's a process that keeps evolving as the company grows.
Couldn't agree more. From that initial step of carefully documenting ideas, to leveraging all the support the Indian government offers, to strategically building and managing that patent portfolio, all of these are critical for long-term success, not just within India, but also in those competitive global markets like the US and Europe.
So for you, the listener, here's something to think about. How proactive are you right now with even those initial stages of patent strategy? Are you documenting your inventions in detail? Are you doing that early screening for patentability? Are you building prototypes? And what about those, maybe seemingly small innovations you're working on right now? Could any of those actually have real patent potential?
Hmm.
It's definitely worth considering. Thanks for joining us for this deep dive.